A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Dr. Christopher Reynolds has written an outstanding book on Australia's history, and it's called What a Capital Idea, Australia from 1770 to 1901. As a historian, Dr. Christopher was first listed in the International Who's Who Historical Society back in 2006. And it's our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Christopher today with the story of the foundation of the colony in New South Wales, which none of us have ever heard before. Dr. Christopher, welcome.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
So let's just revisit where we went before, that secret meeting in Brook Street, London, all those years ago. Just refresh our memory about that, please.
All right, 2 weeks after the convoy, led by Arthur Phillip, has left Britain.
The first fleet coming to New South Wales.
The first fleet coming to New South Wales. There is a meeting among four men, and I believe it's in the Brooks Club, not far from the Parliament in London. I have 2 weeks, so I've got the season, I know who's present, and I know the discussion. This is the best research I have ever done. And in this meeting, a fellow by the name of Baron James Harris, who is the British ambassador to The Hague, the centre of law for Europe, sits with Baron William Pitt, the Prime Minister of England, Marquis Francis Osborne, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and Baron Lord Sydney, who is the Minister, Secretary of State for Colonies and War. I always love how they manage that together. If you had a colony, you were going to have war. If you have war, you're going to have colonies. But anyway, these four men meet in the club. Nobody's around, and they discuss, at Harris's instigation, a plan to bring down and stop the money flowing from Holland into France, which is being used to build up the French Navy, which is threatening the British East India Company. There's a lot of players in this game, right? It's a real James Bond spy versus spy thing.
Yep.
So in this meeting, Harris says, I've got a plan to stop the money going from Holland into France, and that will solve our problem. William Pitt, after an hour's discussion, says to him, "El, how much do you want?" And he says 70,000 British pounds, which is the equivalent of 14 million US dollars today. And Pitt says it'll be in your bank by Friday. Then Harris returns to Holland. Now, a bit of geography here. There's a place in Holland called Orange. Now, Orange is over near the German border, and Hague is on the west coast, right? And so the ruler of Holland is William V of Orange. Now, he is what's called the stadholder, which is the equivalent of the leader of, and he's married to a woman by the name of Wilhelmina. Now, Harris is friends with them and a few other people, as you're about to discover. And he goes and has lunch with them because William is desperate for some funds, because there's this new patriotic democratic movement which is aligned to the French rebels, the revolutionary movement. And they have now influenced the business houses of Amsterdam. This is the Dutch East India Company, and that's the source of the funds. So it's been channeled through the Dutch rebels back into France. Now, Holland is broken up into 7 states, and so there's local governments, and a number of them are now, 4 out of the 7, have aligned themselves with the rebels and the money that's going into France. So William V is quite worried. So he's very happy to welcome James Harris. So James has lunch with him and says, I've got some good news. I've got all this money and it can be used for you to build up your troops and whatever else you need to do. But he said, I've got another little plan. Do you mind if I have a little chat to your wife about the plan? So he talks to Wilhelmina and he says, now this plan is a bit dangerous, but I need you to just trust me. And she says, I will. So what it involves when it gets underway is that Wilhelmina, she is told, is to travel from Orange near the German border across to visit James in The Hague. I don't know what that is, 1,000 kilometres. And he says, Now, I want you to have several places across the country ready to change the horses, because I basically, without him saying it, I want the rebels to know that you're coming. And I actually found a painting of what I'm about to tell you, and you're going to be arrested. And I found a painting of the arrest, and I couldn't believe it. I got the names of the people she's got in the carriage. So she sets out with a couple of other aristocrats, and she got feathers on the coach, feathers on the horse, and you can see her coming. So the day is set for when she's to travel. Harris sits and plays cards with the French ambassador in The Hague, waiting to hear what's happened. So sure enough, she sets out. And sure enough, the Patriots, this democratic movement, stop the coach. Who's in the coach? We know you're coming from the German border, and we're going to arrest you. So they arrest her, put her in a farmhouse with these other four fellows, and the next couple of days she's transferred to a town where she's under basically house arrest. And that's the painting I found when she's going into this town. Now here comes the problem. Wilhelmina is not only Princess Wilhelmina, married to William V. Her brother has become Frederick V of Germany, because the uncle Frederick, King Frederick, has died and the nephew gets the job. So suddenly she is the sister to the King of Germany. But she's also the aunt to King George III of England. This was the wrong person to arrest. So the first thing I know, mate, you think, oh, bugger, when they find out what they've done. So King Frederick takes it as a personal insult that his sister been arrested, and he's banging the drums. He wants troops on the border. Harris has finished his game of cards, and he knows what's going on because he's planned it. He knew that Wilhelmina was the sister and that the Germans were going to attack. What's the problem? The problem is that the Dutch and the English have an alliance and friendship that continues even today and goes back several hundred years. So the moment you start a war with the Dutch, you've got a war with the English. So he's looking for some sort of support because he's angry that it's a personal insult. So the English know this, and Harris goes to see him. And he takes with him a letter that says, it's okay, Frederick, calm down, because the English are going to support you, and I've got the letter. So you are going to be able to invade Holland, but can you give it a month or two, because I've got other things to do, and we've got to work out a compact. Because when the French back down and when it all happens and you invade Holland, then what's going to happen is that the Stradbroker, William, is going to push these demands on the rebels. And so the scene is now set for this invasion.
Amazing. And it's interesting, I just want to give a little bit of a Christian overlay. When you say Holland and England were always very close, it's because they were both Protestant nations, weren't they? That during the Reformation, Holland and Belgium were once the same principality or the same sort of nation state, we'd call it, but the Belgians decided to stay Catholic, the Dutch went Protestant, as did the British when they broke away with the Catholic Church. And I believe that was a reason why both of them were quite close as nations.
And so was Germany Protestant, remember?
Yeah.
Luther, etc., etc. So you've got that religious alliance, which, let's just move sideways a minute here. You see, those men that were making the plans for the New South Wales settlement were Christians. And in the book, I actually write up what their alliance were. And out of the five men, one was Catholic and the others were Protestant. So they were actually doing something with the Sydney settlement that was Christian. There will be no slavery, they said. You know, these people will be assigned to the government. You will set them free as soon as possible.
Yep.
They were being given a second chance. But we've got to just understand, while there is definitely a divine plan for Australia, because nobody wanted to do it, going on, that you've again got these Christian men.
Yeah. Well, Wilberforce was in the background, wasn't he? The author of the song "Amazing Grace." John Newton was involved in selecting the first chaplain to the colony in New South Wales. Yeah. But let's finish the story. So the German king's up in arms, like a good German. He wants to put the jackboots on, march into Holland. And what happens?
Okay. So the other thing is that they got it's all timing. And so Harris says, give it a couple of months, and I've got the dates. I actually got the dates. So with the Germans, Harris sits and writes out what are the compact, what they're going to say, what William's going to say when he gets these people in his court, and he lays it on them, right? He's very upset that his wife's arrested, of course, knowing that it was going to happen. The French are just watching at this point with they can see the troops. So what happens with William? He says, well, we better make out that we're ready for war against the Germans in Holland. So he gets ready. 40 line of battle is the name they call the ships. These are warships, multiple cannons, up to 100 cannons. But he says, wait, just before the invasion, so the French think we're going to attack the Germans. So they're not gathered into Plymouth, the port of Plymouth, until the date's set. Now then, when it's all coming down, there's another letter that's written that William Pitt's cousin, William Grenville, is to take to the French court to the king on the same day. So everything's up. The flags are up, and away it goes. The Germans invade Holland. And while the Germans are coming across with 25,000 troops, and remember the Dutch rebels cannot take that on, they just swoop across the country. William goes up to rescue his wife. When he brings her back, and this is straight out of Harris's diary, as the coach is approaching the Orange County where he lives, as he is approaching, then the crowd is so excited they take William out of the carriage, and I thought they're going to hang him. Oh no, they put him on their shoulders and carry him into the town that he's retaken Holland. And Harris is there at the steps to meet them. He runs up the steps. He's so excited. He goes back to get Wilhelmina. She comes up the steps. She thanks him so much for what he's done. They go inside, and there is all these people that are just now saying, oh, we're really sorry that all this happened to you. How terrible. Then they call all these people that have been causing trouble for this council. Meanwhile, the French don't know what to do because the Germans have invaded Holland. What should we do? Because we have a compact with the Dutch rebels that we will protect them. So there's King Louis with the counts all in the room, all arguing because they can't afford another war. Why can we go and do this? What about writing to the Austrians? Maybe they'll come and help. Wait, there's someone at the door. It's Baron William Grenville. Oh, yes, let's hear from Grenville. I'm sure the British are about to attack the Dutch. When he comes in and he meets the king, he presents the letter. The room is silent. William stands to his feet and he says, they're not going to attack the Dutch. They're supporting the Germans. So William nods his head and leaves the room of discontent, which is what the English wanted, to bring down the French and the money. So the room is in disorder. What happens is in the next couple of years, or that next year, they have to put up taxes because they've got this debt of $255 billion they've got to pay. I know I'm going on, but this is really important. They have to pay this debt. They put up the taxes. The French rebels and the people are upset. They then storm the Bastille. They take over the country. Louis loses his head, and you have the French Revolution, and 2 years later, the French revolutionaries invade Holland, and then Britain declares war on the French. This was all brought on by James Harris.
In that meeting in London with William, amazing, and they even said, didn't they, shall we call the First Fleet back because we don't need the First Fleet?
You're jumping ahead. I've told you this. What happens is, and straight out of Harris's diary, he puts on a party in The Hague, and he says there were 400 people at the fete I organised on the front lawn. He's got a decent house, I would seem, if he's a baron, and he has this ball. And William and Wilhelmina come to the ball, but so do the British secretly come also to meet the people that they've been helping. So on the side of the room, when William and Wilhelmina are being introduced to Prime Minister Pitt, Baron Francis Osborne, Lord Sydney, then as they move away, one says, for Francis Osborne says to William Pitt, shall we call back the convoy because we don't need Arthur Phillip and the Sydney settlement? And Pitt says, Well, yes, I suppose we could, but let them continue. You never know when we might need them. But here's the point. At that date, which is October 1787, Britain did not need the settlement. 5 months later, Philip arrives in Sydney. La Perouse arrives a week later, and he's there to get his ship repaired. He's hoping there's a colony, but there wasn't one. And this explains why when Grenville, Baron William Grenville, takes over from Lord Sydney, the Secretary of State of War and the Colonies, that he doesn't care about just the transportees going to Australia to start a second chance. He's sending criminals and the Irish, and a lot of them die on the way because they've lost their motivation for setting up the settlement in Sydney.
Amazing. But we know that God had a great plan for Australia, and with all these machinations and backroom deals and alliances and treaties and invasions, God definitely had a plan for Australia. Dr. Christopher Reynolds, I want to thank you so much for filling us in on this fascinating history and insight into Australia's history. Now, this book you've written, What a Capital Idea, if people want to buy a copy of that book, how do they do that? They just search on Google, What a Capital Idea, and it'll come up. And I believe it's $109.
But if they put in the code, when they come to purchase it, it says, do you know the code? If you put in 1770, you can have 25% off, only because you listen to this program today.
Brilliant. Well, Dr. Christopher Reynolds, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 Today.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.